welcome to today's episode of Seed Speaks. My name is Ashley Robinson, and I'm the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide. Today, I'll be acting as your host. On today's episode of Seed Speaks, we're taking a closer look at grocery store shopping habits and what the agriculture industry should know. And I'd just like to take a quick second to thank our guests for joining us today. We have Kim Breshears and Leslie Redmond on here with us today. Thanks so much, ladies. And to those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's start with just getting to know our panelists. So Kim, can you please tell me about your work at Potatoes USA?
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with everyone today. Again, my name is Kim Breshears. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Potatoes USA. Potatoes USA is the commodity marketing group for potatoes in the US, and I have the opportunity to work on all of the marketing programs that we do to promote and strengthen the demand for potatoes.
Thanks so much, Kim. And Leslie, can you tell me a bit about your research work at the University of Manitoba?
Yes, hi, thank you again for having us here today. My name is Leslie Redmond. I am an assistant professor at the University of Manitoba. I work in the Faculty of Agriculture and Food Sciences, and specifically food and human nutritional sciences. So a lot of the research that takes place here at the University of Manitoba is agriculturally focused. So I do have a little bit of interest specifically in agriculture, but also in applied human nutrition. So my work specifically is public health focused, chronic disease prevention, and basically trying to understand how we can help the public to live healthier, happier lives.
Thanks, ladies. And let's get going on our questions. So first off, Kim, I'd just like to ask you a question about your work at Potatoes USA. What have your market insights shown in regard to consumer preference when it comes to potatoes?
Well, we study annually consumer attitudes and preferences for food in general in the US and then potatoes specifically. And what we're seeing specific to potatoes is that the demand is extremely strong. One of the measures we do on an annual basis is look at and ask consumers, what's your favorite vegetable? And for the last 7 years, potatoes have ranked the highest in preference for vegetables consumed by consumers. And we rank them not just a random order, but we really look at the top 20 most consumed vegetables in the US, and potatoes is on top. So we are America's favorite vegetable. We're also the #1 vegetable sold in the produce department in retail stores here in the US. And then we ask some questions about food service as well. Today, I know we're talking mostly about retail, but in the food service sector, consumers indicate that potatoes are their favorite side dish, whether they eat it in a restaurant or take it out. So the demand is really strong and definitely a preference among consumers.
Yeah, and has anything changed over the years in regards to demand with potatoes or what consumers are looking for?
It's a great question. There are always changes in terms of consumer preferences. And of course, the pandemic had a sizable impact on that. But what we're seeing, particularly in the retail sector, is that all forms of potato sales have been increasing. So since the pandemic, we've seen a dramatic increase in the sale of frozen potatoes as well as dehydrated potatoes. Some of that's probably driven by the availability of those products, but also the desire for convenience that they offer compared to fresh potatoes. Fresh potato sales continue to remain strong and have continued to grow. Some of the changes that we've seen is that consumers are really opting for smaller pack sizes when it comes to fresh potatoes. In particular, the 5-pound bag is the #1 size sold of potatoes in the US, but the under 2-pound bag size has grown dramatically over the past several years. That trend started before the pandemic, but continues to today. Another thing to note is that consumers are diversifying their basket. I've already talked about the increase in frozen and instant potatoes that are being sold. But when it comes to fresh potatoes, the russet variety is the #1 sold in the US. But by and large, consumers are also buying more colors of potatoes. So red potatoes, Yellow potatoes have seen the largest growth as a percentage in the US, but they're also enjoying, fingerling potatoes, petite potatoes, purple potatoes as well, although russets still dominate the sales.
Thank you. And Leslie, can you talk a bit about what the research shows in regards to how consumers shop when it comes to nutrition?
Yes, good question. And, nutrition is one of the top things that come to mind when we think about, what's going to influence consumers or the public to purchase one thing versus another. And what we do know is that consumers want nutrition information. Um, Now, what they do with that nutrition information remains inconsistent and unresolved. So, in other words, we have data that shows consumers are self reporting that they use nutrition labels. But when we actually objectively measure their use, for example, there's one study that looks at eye tracking to see when nutrition information is displayed on the screen for a particular product, are consumers actually looking at the nutrition information or are they looking at something else? For example, the picture of the food product. And so even though they're reporting high nutrition label use, their self-reporting is higher than their objective measure for actually using that nutrition label. So again, we know they want nutrition. We know there's interest in nutrition and higher awareness of nutrition. But again, it remains inconsistent. So, as nutrition, agriculture, even marketing professionals, um, we also need to be aware that nutrition is just one variable that comes to mind when we think about what's going to influence consumer purchasing. And, as a dietitian in the US, um, I want nutrition to be number one, of course, for everybody. I want everyone to be considering it and thinking about it when they make their food purchases. But we know that's not going to be the case. We know that there's all kinds of other variables out there, both personal and environmental, that are going to influence our choices, arguably more influential, such as taste preference. That's often cited as the number one indicator. Um, Different emotional attachments to certain foods. Potatoes, I think, certainly would be one of those that many people might have an emotional attachment to. There's a lot of comfort foods associated with potatoes. Different constraints, whether that's financial restraints, family restraints that are going to influence what you're able to purchase. Each of these is going to come into play and will more than likely outrank nutrition as far as what's going to be most important in terms of deciding what consumers purchase.
That's all really interesting. And I have a question that's just general. Whoever feels like answering it can. As a farmer, what should I keep in mind about consumer shopping habits when I pick varieties to plant? Is it important to focus on nutrition or physical appearance? And I think you both will have some really interesting insights to say on this. So whoever feels like tackling it first, go ahead.
I guess I'll jump in and start the answer to that. Certainly, you asked if a farmer should think more about nutrition or about appearance of a product, and I think both are important. However, I think nutrition, if I were to prioritize, would probably be the more important piece of it. I concur with everything that was said earlier about what consumers are looking for and what their stated desires are around nutrition versus what they're actually maybe doing when purchasing a product. Taste does reign supreme. Appearance is a little less important today than I would say it was pre-pandemic, and that's primarily driven by the increase of online shopping. Consumers aren't necessarily going into the store as frequently as they were before and choosing product based on appearance. Now, that doesn't mean that appearance isn't important to a consumer, but I think weighing nutrition and the value that that product delivers to their lifestyle is probably of paramount importance.
I can chime in too a little bit there. I think I agree that both are definitely important to keep in mind. I'll kind of introduce a different angle in that some of the research shows um, that even if nutrition information is provided, and we do know from research that when that information is provided, consumers do perceive that product to be healthier. They have this perception that if a nutrition label says it's healthy, then they're expecting better quality, they're expecting better nutrition, better support for their overall health. However, some recent research shows that if the other sensory attributes are not met, then that nutrition labeling alone is not really enough to influence a purchase. So, in other words, if those other characteristics such as taste, flavor, appearance, texture, if those aren't being met otherwise, then the labeling for nutrition might not be enough. That's not to say it will always be that way. I think there could be really fun and creative ways to improve nutrition labeling and through educational campaigns and so forth that might make that a more powerful predictor. But that's just kind of what the research is showing right now. And additionally, there is some evidence that consumers are a little bit wary of products that maybe have been manipulated to be more nutritious. Not that that's really what we were discussing. We were kind of discussing nutrition overall, but I know that one of the tactics is to maybe increase the nutritional quality of products through a little bit of manipulation, which is fine and can be very important in some cases, especially in populations that might be missing critical elements in their diets, or such as certain micronutrients. But consumers, when they hear about that, tend to be a little bit wary. For example, biofortification of foods or genetic modification, right? These can be scary words if people don't understand them. So there is some wariness there. And but on the good side, I also want to add there is, in kind of agreeing with what was said earlier, this we're kind of moving away from the appearance being as important as it was, and there's kind of this like ugly produce movement maybe people have heard of, that it's actually advocating to choose that uglier produce because otherwise it's going to waste, and people are becoming more and more conscious of how much food waste we're responsible for as a population.
You had so many great points to say there. I don't know if Kim has anything to comment maybe on that ugly produce movement, because I know it's really picking up steam in the potato industry.
It is. And Leslie, I'm so glad you mentioned the ugly produce movement. There definitely is momentum there, and its foundation is around food waste and the sustainability of a product. Now, I know sustainability means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and everybody has their own definition of it and or what aspects of it are most important. But the ugly produce movement does weigh into that conversation. And with the younger generation, the younger consumers, it's more a part of their decision making process in terms of what foods they're purchasing and or consuming. So the ugly produce movement, I think, is here to stay. If I were to predict that, just based on all of the drivers that we're seeing in terms of the decisions that younger consumers in particular are making about their food choices.
And there's a audience question that I think also picks up on some of what Leslie's points are in regards to manipulation of nutrition or other aspects. So we have an audience question from Alexa Hahn here, and it's asking that, what would you say breeders need to keep in mind concerning those consumer preferences in grocery stores? What should they prioritize?
Maybe that was directed at me because I was the one who brought it up, and certainly I know that's kind of opening a can of worms to bring up that topic. But as far as consumer preferences, I mean, I think the main barrier is just a misunderstanding or a lack of education around what some of these different breeding techniques are. I mean, just the basic understanding that some of these things can be achieved through traditional breeding methods, right? It's nothing. Um, it's nothing like scary in a laboratory. We're not introducing new weird produce to the market. Like, it's methods that have been used for decades and centuries, even in some cases. And so I think having really strong consumer messaging around that, an educational campaign around what it actually means, could go a long way in helping to dispel some of that uncertainty.
Definitely. And let's move on to our next question, which is focusing more on back to those trends in grocery store shopping. What trends in grocery store shopping should the agriculture industry keep in mind, such as that ugly produce movement, or is the plant protein really growing in popularity, or was that a fad? What are we looking at here? Maybe I'll let you take this first, Kim.
So, what we've been noticing in retail is that consumers are shopping the perimeter of the store at an increasing rate than they did before. And if you think about what's in the perimeter of the store, it's really your fresh fruits and vegetables, your meats, your dairy. Types of products. So that has been increasing in terms of sales, and that trend has been going on for a little bit now. So the center of the store, those products that you would obviously go up and down the aisle for is not as strong in terms of sales there. So I think when we're talking about the growth of um, produce, because that's a conversation for today, that is a positive trend for the industry, and I think something that growers need to keep in mind when they're growing there. Um, as it relates to plant protein, that's a tough question. I don't think that the demand is decreasing, but I think consumers are more confused about it than they were before. And part of that is because of the growth in what are considered plant-based products. And I use air quotes on this because um, there's been some backlash in some of the products that are available to consumers today that were not necessarily fully plant-based, if you will. They were derived from cells in certain plants and kind of then manufactured. And consumers, again, back to some of the decisions and those that are more in tune to how food is produced are a bit confused as to whether that truly is a plant-based protein or it was a manufactured plant-based protein. So there's some confusion out there. And I don't think that that confusion has settled. And I think will continue for a little bit further.
Definitely great insights there. Leslie, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, actually, and I was going to say something very similar to what Kim said, in that there is some confusion there. And from the nutrition perspective and thinking also sustainability perspective, what we're seeing is, consumers were seeking out plant-based proteins or even combination animal plant-based proteins for the three main reasons of health, sustainability, and variety. And but what they're looking for is something to meet those three criteria. They're not necessarily looking for an ultra processed food that also happens to be plant based. So I think that speaks to some of that confusion there, and that how are these actually produced? Does it meet those criteria for those consumers? So I think if the plant based protein trend is going to continue, I think it needs to also be paired with some educational campaign, um, not just how plant based might support human health, but also environmental health. Really emphasize how it could reduce food waste by using byproduct from other manufacturing process that might have otherwise gone to waste, maybe reducing carbon footprint, and showing how all of those things can be taken into consideration.
All really great insights. And speaking still on in regards to kind of that culture when we're looking at the world, how do cultural shifts such as fad diets impact the products people buy and therefore what those in ag need to produce? And Leslie, I'll let you answer this one first this time.
Sure. Oh, fad diets. So as a nutrition professional, unfortunately, we're kind of from the perspective that unfortunately fad diets are influencing what's available and on the market and what agricultural producers are focusing on. Mostly fad diets are with the outcome of weight loss. And for someone who works in the nutrition field, if we are then creating products to keep up with those fad diets, we are also promoting weight loss, and that's promoting kind of a weight normative culture that honestly is not what we should be doing. We can do better, and we should be doing better. So from the nutrition perspective, we don't love that fad diets influence what's on the market, but there can be some good from it and some bad. So for like a good example, with the gluten-free fad that we have seen, when gluten-free became a trend, it really increased the variety of products that were available on the market. So for individuals who truly have a health condition that requires them to eat gluten-free, they were thrilled with all the increased variety, the efforts that people were putting into making those foods actually taste good. For them, it was a really good thing. But on the flip side, kind of the negative side effect is that suddenly you're seeing foods labeled gluten free that were always naturally gluten free. And so that's introducing confusion to the market. If I see gluten free water, which was actually a thing labeled gluten free water, then I'm thinking, well, does that mean other water has gluten? And if I don't buy the one that says gluten-free, does that mean all the other ones have it? So it's introducing confusion to the marketplace. So we just have to be really careful.
Thank you. And Kim, is there anything you'd like to add? Because I know when I talk to those in the potato industry, one of the things that always comes up is the days of the Atkins diet. So is there anything else you'd like to add maybe on that or anything that Leslie said there?
Yes, I appreciate all of Leslie's comments because nutrition has just become so confusing to consumers because of all of these fads. And as it relates to the low carb diet and its impact on the potato industry, that's something we've been at the forefront of trying to correct, if you will, the misinformation that's out there about the importance of certain products within the diet, and especially potatoes and the role potatoes play in the diet. Data shows that in the US, I think it's the Boston Medical Center has some research out that says about 50% of Americans subscribe to some kind of fad diet on an annual basis, which is just makes our job challenging. We have to keep up with giving the right information that's out there so that consumers can make wise decisions. But the fact of the matter is, fruits and vegetables in their natural state provide a lot of really important nutrients to the diet, and that will be there regardless of what diet is in vogue at this point in time versus another point in time. But from the potato perspective, we rely heavily on research, and we try to communicate that research in a manner to consumers that help them to make really wise decisions and see that there's definitely a role for potatoes on the menu.
Thanks. And you mentioned this before, Kim, in regards to that click and collect online grocery shopping. So, how has the shift to more click and collect grocery shopping impacted what people are buying? I'll let you answer first, and then Leslie, I'll let you add some comments in.
Well, I'm most aware of what it's done to the potatoes in the basket. And as I mentioned at the onset, consumers are buying more and more potatoes than they have in the past. Our data shows that the sale of potatoes, I'm not just talking the dollar sales, but when we look at the volume of sales sold in the US, has continued to increase over the last 10 years. So click and collect is just another means that consumers can purchase the product. And for the potato industry, that's great news because they're buying it, they're able to buy potatoes if they prefer to shop in that manner or if they prefer to shop in the store. But demand continues to be strong. And I think click and collect is just another way in which consumers can buy their products.
Definitely. And Leslie, is there anything else you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I think that, the online shopping and these shifts to click and collect purchasing methods have really opened a whole new arena as far as grocery sales goes. And what we're seeing from the nutritional perspective is that for online shopping, these online shoppers tend to look at the pictures of the food online again versus the actual detailed nutrition information. So again, going back to that, they consumers want nutrition information. They say it's important, but when it comes down to it and they're online and they're looking at their basket, they're looking at the pictures of the food and not necessarily the nutrition. But also on the good side, we see that there is lower spending on unhealthy and impulse sensitive items, for example, frozen desserts or grain based type desserts. So when you're online, those impulse buys go down versus when you're in the store.
Interesting. And I have another question that from the audience I think kind of goes along with some of the stuff that you're saying there, Leslie. So Marcus Sinkowitz is asking, are rising food costs impacting people when it comes to making healthy choices, especially in fresh produce? And Leslie, I think I'll let you answer this first, give those nutritional impact insight, and then Kim, you can follow up.
Sure. I think, yes, absolutely rising food costs are impacting people, but the degree to which it impacts somebody's purchasing is going to depend on their demographic. So there's plenty of population that will not be affected by rising costs, and they will continue to purchase exactly what they had before, including some of those kind of commodity fresh fruits and vegetables, and also some of the ones that are considered kind of more specialized that might have higher prices to begin with. But there is a large demographic, very large, that is going to be heavily impacted by these rising prices. And so for them, they're either going to shift away from fresh fruits and vegetables entirely, away from fresh produce, into frozen and maybe canned options, or they're going to really be selective with what they're choosing and choose those lower cost options.
And I would add, from a potato perspective, what we've seen in terms of the cost, yes, it has increased with inflation, the cost of potatoes to the consumer, but it is not outpacing the cost, the rate of inflation, and it still is a very affordable, nutrient dense product that consumers can buy. And we've not seen any slowing of sales as it relates to potatoes, despite the inflationary period that we're in right now.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question before we wrap this up. And I think it's going to be a really good way to wrap up all that we've been talking about today. What can those in the agriculture industry do to help consumers connect the food they're buying at the grocery stores to what is produced on farms? Kim, I'll let you go first.
It's pretty simple. Tell your story. Consumers really do appreciate knowing where their food comes from. In fact, in the US, data shows that 90% of consumers report that they trust farmers and they're really curious where their food comes from. So, any opportunity you have to tell your story is great. If that can be done in the retail store by partnering with retailers, all the better. That's kind of that point of purchase. I know some retailers here in the US allow that to occur. Some of them are pretty constrained in terms of what signage and messaging they put in store. But you can tell the story on your own business sites, your social media sites, in a pretty cost-effective way. Let people know what you're doing. They're curious about that.
Thanks. And Leslie, I'll let you have the final words.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I was going to say, tell those stories, leverage social media. As Kim mentioned, that is pretty accessible and pretty affordable. And most people are using social media these days. And tell your story, not just, from maybe a company perspective, but also what's happening on the farm, and farm worker stories as well. Um, it's consumers want transparency these days. They want to know that story of how the food went from the farm to their fork, and so that transparency in those stories are really important. And I would also add, maybe having a presence in the community to the degree which you can. As Kim mentioned, maybe there's some limitations in retail outlets, but perhaps there's other ways to be involved, such as sponsoring local events like different runs or walks or activities, maybe hosting farm tours. That's another way to connect with the public. So these are just some ideas.
Thanks, ladies. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. So I'd just like to take a quick second to thank Kim and Leslie for joining us. And this conversation was so interesting and so insightful. And I'm really excited to look back at what we talked about today when I read a story about it. And for those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed part of today's live stream, don't worry, we'll have it available on demand on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions about the subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, please send a message to Seed World's Facebook page or feel free to reach out to myself. And next week, we have another really interesting and exciting topic to tackle. My colleague, Alex Martin, will be talking about breeding and eating the rainbow. So thanks, everyone, for watching today, and have a great rest of your day.